welcome to this podcast, talk, interview, whatever we can call it. I'm really glad that we made it. I am a
Yeah.
really a fan of your work.
Oh,
I have seen some of your books in Amazon, and they are awesome. So the idea is that we talk about your career, about your books, and then also I have some questions about Agile. What is your perspective, etc. So
okay.
welcome to the channel, and let's start. Could you briefly describe your journey? How did you started your career? Where do you live? How did you got to this agile side or agile topics at some point in your life?
Well, it's a really long story, but I'll try to make it short. I started out as a programmer. I got a job as a programmer trainee because I needed a job and no experience was required. They just liked my business background because I had a business degree, and I did that for a while. And when I worked for a software vendor, we had the bright idea that maybe it'd be good if we tested our product before we sent it to customers. And our managers were like, "Oh, maybe we should have a group that does that." Whoa. So that's how I got into testing, and I realized I liked that a lot more even than I like programming. But although I always like programming because I always worked interactively, collaboratively with the end users, and working even back in the 80s, we didn't have a word for what we did, but it was really a very agile approach, working in small increments, getting a lot of feedback from the users as we went to say, is this what you're looking for? Is this working for you? So that's how I learned at the get-go. So that was good. And I've been lucky to work with teams that did good development practices, even back in the early 90s we didn't have the same words for them, but I saw the value of continuous integration, automated deployments, unit level test automation at the other levels, which, that was happening even back then. And then in 2000, I learned about extreme programming, and some friends of mine that I had been working with decided to form their own startup and use extreme programming practices. And they gave me the Kent Beck's Extreme Programming Explained book to read. And when I read it, it was just like, whoa, this is awesome. It's all about the people. It's all about testing. It's all about quality. And I really, really wanted to do it because I could see it would solve the problems that we were having, because we were working in a more waterfall environment with all these, stages and freezing the code and having our competitors pass us by because we were too slow. So I just realized it was the way to work. And although the books at the time about extreme programming didn't mention testers, they talked all about testing, at least about functional testing and guiding development with tests. So I
Your
begged my
first book is
friends.
about extreme programming with testing, agile testing, right? That's the first one.
I'm talking about the original extreme programming by people like Kent
Okay.
Beck, Ron Jeffries. They were not about, they were about testing, but they didn't talk about what testers or what testers would do on extreme programming teams. So I begged my friends to hire me onto their extreme programming team, and we learned together. And we did find that I could add a lot of value pairing and collaborating with programmers, helping the non-testers learn testing skills, working with customers to help them articulate what they really needed and give us examples, which you could turn into tests. And early on, I met Janet Gregory via the Extreme Programming mailing list and a mutual friend, Brian Merrick. And she was going through the same thing. She had joined an extreme programming team. They weren't sure what a tester should do. So we were trading our experiences. And my first book, I just felt like somebody should write a book about testing in general on extreme programming, because I could see a lot of teams were struggling with, how do you do this? It's great to have test-driven development and all these other great practices, but there's a lot more to testing. And so nobody else would write the book, so I wrote it with a different friend of mine, Tip House. And then a few years later, my editor at Addison Wesley said, well, could you write another book, but make it more general for Agile? Because by then we had Agile. In 2000, we only had extreme programming. We didn't have the word Agile yet, because that came along in 2001. So by 2000, I don't know, this was probably 2008 that Janet and I started working on this book. Agile was a thing. And so we decided to write a book about Agile testing, and we did a lot of research with teams all over the world to find out how they approached it, what problems did they have, how did they work around those problems, how do you fit testing into short iterations and things like that.
So before jumping to the new books, the agile ones,
Uh-huh.
did you know that's the book that I was talking about? The first one is Testing Extreme Programming. Did you know that if I jump into Amazon right now and I try to buy it, the book is here in Mexico. There's only one option to buy it. and it's $500.
Is that the
I don't
second
know why.
edition?
I don't know. It's just
There's a second edition, which is maybe the current one. So maybe you're looking at a collector's item of the first
yeah,
one, because
maybe.
he rewrote it, and I don't know, a few years ago, Kent rewrote that book. So that would be
Okay, no
sad.
worries.
Was that expensive? It's not even a
That's
very big
very
book.
expensive.
I have it on my
Yeah,
shelf.
the other ones are more, normal pricing, I would say. But yeah, so continue. Just wanted to let you know that. So then you started with the agile practices, and you went for the second book, right?
Yeah, the agile testing book with Janet. Like I say, we talk to people all over the world to understand. Here we know how we're approaching testing with our teams. How are other people doing it? And we actually found that most people, no matter where they were, ran into very similar problems, and they solved them in similar ways. And we got a lot of people to contribute sidebars to the book because, Janet and I are generalists. We're not expert in everything. Like, we're not expert in mobile app testing or security testing or testing in big enterprise companies. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of areas, right? And so we got a lot of people to contribute their stories, and that's that's the feedback we've gotten of what people love about the book. Is it's not just me and Janet. It's people from lots of different kinds of organizations contributing their experiences and seeing that we all are facing similar problems and we can solve them in similar ways. So yeah, I don't know how far you want me to go, but
Yeah.
once I was on an extreme programming team, I never wanted to do anything else. And extreme programming practices. I've been on Scrum teams and other teams, but generally I've been on teams that embraced the extreme programming practices like pair programming, continuous integration, refactoring. I can't think of them all off the top of my head, but just that way of working really incrementally and iteratively and really closely with our customers, our business stakeholders, people in other specialties. We need designers, we need data experts, we need site reliability engineers, we need accessibility experts, we need so many people involved. And I've been lucky to work on teams where the leadership of the company understood the value of quality and that we needed all these people to collaborate to get a product that would make our customers happy and be able to deliver it sustainably.
So for these, we're talking for the second book, we're talking about the one you made with Janet Gregory. We're talking about 2009, right? So it's
That was when it
the
was published.
early adoption of Agile, I would say, right? It's not so popular as today.
Well, certainly. I mean, by 2009, there were quite a few companies. I think people would have said it's crossed the chasm, that it had become more mainstream, but certainly not today. But I mean, I think to be realistic today, you see a lot of companies saying they're doing Agile and they're not. Maybe they bought Jira or they're using Safe, but that doesn't mean that they've embraced. What it really comes down to are the Agile principles behind the Agile manifesto. And when organizations are following those principles, then yes, they're Agile. But if they're doing stand-ups every day and releasing every 2 weeks, it doesn't necessarily mean that they've embraced those principles. So, but the buzzword has become more popular and it's become less meaningful. And that's why a couple of years ago, Janet came up with her holistic testing model, and she used the word holistic because it encompasses the whole team approach, and we know the whole team has to take responsibility for quality and testing. And it also embraces that idea of we have testing activities through the whole software development lifecycle. If you look at like the infinite DevOps loop, testing, as Dan Ashby famously did his little continuous testing model some years ago, we test all the way around that loop. And so Janet came up with the term holistic testing because it explains it better. If we say agile testing, we have our own definition of that, but it may be different from other people's definition. So we kind of wanted our own thing that people could understand better.
So that's when you created the last one, the Agile Testing Condensed?
Yeah, well, so we had agile testing, and then about 5 years later, our editor said, well, do you want to do a second edition and revise the first book? And we looked at the first book and said, well, no, all the things in that book are still relevant, and everything recommended there is still good. But it's been a few years, and we've learned a lot more. So we could talk about a lot more in terms of testing and things that have changed, and the technology and the infrastructure, more cloud-based architecture and things like that. So we wrote more agile testing. And again, we had so many contributors. We had 40 people contribute 70 sidebars to that book. It's really encompasses a lot of information. And then a few years after that, we decided we should write a short book because those two books were both very long, and a lot of people really don't, and they're not designed to read cover to cover. We hope people will come in and read the part that's relevant to them. Oh, I want to create a test automation strategy, or oh, I need to do mobile testing, and you just go to the part that's relevant. But we decided to write the Agile Testing Condensed because we wanted a short book that maybe we could get managers to read. And get people just to introduce the concepts, and then we could provide links so they could learn more. So Agile Testing Condensed has an overview of the information that's in both of our first two books, and again, it was a few years later, so there's a lot that's new, a lot more about DevOps and continuous delivery and deployment and observability and things that were really getting new on the scene since we'd written more agile testing. So there's some new material in there too. And there are a lot of links, not only to our other books, but to other information out in the world about these newer topics that people are facing big challenges, and so we can point them to ways to overcome those.
Got it. So you would say that probably if I'm a QA or a tester or a junior, senior, I'm starting to understand how to do this better and I want to document myself, I would go probably with the Agile Testing Complete book. And if I'm a manager, I want a more condensed place to look at how things should go in the QA environment, I would go with the condensed one. Is that?
I think everyone should, if they haven't read either one of the first two, I would say everyone should start with condensed. Get that brief introduction, a little foundation, and then see where you want to go next to learn more. We also have an even shorter book that we wrote about the holistic testing model, because again, that's something we came up, that mainly Janet, but we came up with since Agile Testing Condensed, and because more and more teams are engaged in or trying to move towards continuous delivery. So we have these really short cycles of, how do we fit testing if we're deploying to production every day or multiple times a day? Well, how do you do exploratory testing? How do you do testing you can't automate? Or what if you just haven't automated yet? What do you do? And what do you do about production issues? And what can you learn from production? So we wrote a mini book called Holistic Testing, Weaving Quality into Your Product. And that's available for free. We just made it as an ebook, and we've got it on our agiletestingfellow.com website. So if people go to the homepage there, they can just download that one, because we had a lot of blog posts about it and videos about it, but it was like, well, people want one central place to learn about that and how to apply it. And so that's why we did the mini book. So.
Awesome. So we will put the link over there in the description of the video or the comments, so everyone can either buy them or also download the other one. That's great. What is your creative process, Lisa, of like, I have a lot of stuff that I want to share with the world, I need to put it in a book, or I have a lot of notes, or I need to write a book, and then you start going through the index, starting to collect the ideas. How did you thought about it? How did you work it out?
Well, Janet and I both love mind maps. And so with all of our books and all of our courses, because we have two live training courses that we offer through our training providers, including some in Mexico, because we have our courses available in Spanish as well.
Nice.
But anything we've done, we mind map for. Even sometimes when we just write an article or design a new workshop for a conference, we start with a mind map. So it helps us brainstorm what should we include, and then we put everything we might include, and then we can go back and say, well, what's the most important thing? Maybe we don't need these things, and that really guides us. And for the books, we actually mind map the whole book, and then for each chapter we make a mind map, and that really helped us organize our material. And it's something that you can show to other people and get feedback. So that's the process that works for us. I really like it. And I would encourage people who have a love for people to share their experiences and their ideas. And, it's a lot of work, no matter how you decide to do it. But, books, or maybe you're more comfortable making videos. I think that's a lot of people learn better watching videos, and, a blog post series, or Anne Marie Charrett is writing a book on quality coaching, and she's doing it kind of a episode by episode way. So if you buy the book, then every month you get an email that has like a chapter of the book, which I think is a really interesting way to do it. And she has guests writing chapters as well. And so you don't get it all at once, and she doesn't have to write it all at once, but you get it incrementally as she goes through it. So there are a lot of different models to share learning now, and I think that's really, really nice.
Yeah, that sounds good. I agree with you. Lisa, are you doing consulting right now, or what are you up to today nowadays?
Well, I did quit my full-time job last year after more than 40 years in the software business.
Wow.
I'm mainly occupied with our Agile Testing Fellowship with the courses. Last year, Janet and I developed a new course, Holistic Testing for Continuous Delivery. And like I say, it's a lot of work. It's just as hard as writing a book. Trying to come up with a good learning experience for people. And especially now, because most often that's going to be offered remotely. People still haven't really gotten back to in-person courses too much. So figuring out how can we have a hands-on exercise using a Miro board, or we have to put a lot of thought into that. And so I've been spending a lot of time on that. And then, yes, also I am available for consulting and training and things like that. So I kind of started my freelance business at a bad time because the economy kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
Just when I got started. I had a few clients last year, but one of the things I really that I got to do with a client last year that I'm keen to do is a quality practices assessment. So Janet wrote another book with somebody else. Hooray! She and Selena DeLisi came up with their quality practices assessment model, and that's a way to look at your agile team, your agile organization, and it takes 10. They've prioritized 10 quality aspects that they feel are the most important ones for teams to be successful with delivering a quality product in today's continuous world. And so it's a great model. There are 4 dimensions in each aspect, and so they have a process for going through and doing things like process retrospectives, interviews, observing the teams to figure out where is the team in each one of these aspects. And then that helps the team or the organization say, okay, we're strong in these things. We're not very strong in this aspect, but it's not very important to our success because everybody doesn't have to, every context is different. But here's an area where we really do need to improve. And so let's focus our improvement area here, because you can't fix everything at once. You have to focus. And so I love this model because it helps people get a baseline, prioritize what they want to improve, try some experiments to improve those things, and then periodically go back and reassess it. So that's of course, people can do that internally for themselves as well. But sometimes it's good to have somebody impartial and from the outside that people feel. It's also important that people feel honest sharing what it is they do. A lot of times they might say what they're supposed to be doing. It's not really what they're doing because of various good reasons, right? So that's one of the things that I'm doing, that I have done and hope to do some more. And I'm doing a lot of blogging. Janet and I have our Agile Testing Fellow Donkeys and Dragons YouTube channel. So we do about a 20-minute video chat every month, and we've had some really great guests on that. So there's a lot of things that keep me busy. And speaking at conferences, I'll be going to, I don't know when this podcast will air, but I'll be going to Agile on the Beach in early July. And then Janet and I are doing a workshop on the quality practices assessment model at Targeting Quality in Ontario, Canada in September. And then I'll be at Agile Testing Days in Potsdam in November as well. So conferences are still keeping me busy as well. So I'm
That's
also,
awesome.
yeah, I'm also using, because I do have a lot more free time. So I'm helping with open source projects, because all these years I've used these wonderful open source tools, testing tools like Cucumber and Robot Framework and Selenium, but I've never done much to give back to those communities, to those projects. So I'm taking time now to help with open source projects and help with conferences, because conferences always need volunteers, with review committees and things like that. And helping people, I love helping people who are new. They want to start speaking at conferences, and I love helping people, think of what they might like to speak about and craft a proposal and help them prepare their session. So it's really nice to have some free time to do those things and feel like I can contribute back, pay forward all the help I've gotten over the years. So that's a really nice feeling.
That's great. You have a lot to share to the world. So I will make sure that we put in the description of this video your YouTube channel and also the workshops where you're participating, the trainings, the courses, everything. If the audience wants to continue following up on Lisa, we will make sure that it's over there, all the information, right? So we do kind of follow the same approach that you mentioned, right? Normally in agile coaching, we do an assessment, and then we see where are the pain points, and then we try to promote a strategy to get to the point where we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And my question would be, so maybe there are persons looking at this video and saying, well, I'm not sure if I need to call Lisa right now and ask her, hey, help me with this. What are some signals or some triggers or some pain points, maybe the 5 or something most frequent that will let know someone in a company that they need Lisa right away?
Well, there are a couple things. One of them I see so frequently is they're doing an agile transition or a DevOps transition. They have testers on the teams, and yet their developers are still not doing testing, or maybe they're doing unit level testing. But generally, they're still handing all the testing over to the testers, and they've got that mini waterfall going on. So that's one red flag that I see a lot, and that I have a lot of ways to help people, because I've experienced that myself in my many years working on teams. And another thing I'm really hoping to, the last few years trying to help with is, we have all this great infrastructure now. We have these complex cloud-based applications. We put things out in front of our customers, and we need to know if they're having problems. And we need to learn from what they're doing. And we have great monitoring tools, observability tools, analytics tools that can give us that information. But I find that so often, if you look at the DevOps loop, testers are engaged on the left side and, planning and testing as they go, building new features. But once they put it in production, a lot of times the whole delivery team just gives it over to the operations people and the platform engineers say, okay, it's in production now, you take care of it. And I really want to help teams embrace that DevOps culture of we built it, we run it. It's so important for the team to get the direct feedback of any customer pain that they have felt, or any customer joy that they have delivered. And so it's really important that we all, including testers, learn what data do we need to capture in our logs, what events, what traces, what information about what customers are doing do we need to capture, so that then once we've put a new feature in production, we can watch and see, sometimes they're not even using the new feature. Why is that? They couldn't discover it, or we see repeatedly people making a mistake that we could prevent maybe with a change to our feature, or we just see, there's unexpected, we always have unknown unknowns, no matter how hard we try to test everything. Something's happening, we're getting a 500 error. Why is that? We can use these great tools, observability tools, to ask questions of our production system. And those question asking skills are the same ones we use on the left side when we're asking questions about new features and how customers will use them and what could go wrong. We can ask great questions once things are in production as well. And our testing skills are needed over there. And I really want delivery teams, and especially testers, to be involved throughout that whole software development cycle. And so helping teams understand how to fit all these testing activities in if they're trying to get to continuous delivery. Because if they don't get traction on the testing, they're not going to succeed. It's really an integral part. And so that's one of the things I love helping people with.
Awesome. You mentioned it, right? One of the big challenges that I have seen with the teams doing Scrum, for example, is that the developers go ahead and start developing, and 2 days before the end of the sprint, the testers are given finish this, right? And they're like, well, we have only 2 days. There's a concept called shift left. I think that you should be very familiarized with that one. So what tips could you give to the QAs or testers that are looking at this video to start working in a more collaborative way or to avoid this challenge?
Well, of course, it's not only up to the testers, as we know. The whole team has to get engaged, and everybody wants to have a good quality product, of course. And so I think the first step is to get the team together and talk about what quality means to you and what level of quality do you want to achieve and how would you measure that. Set some quality goals as a team and commit. You're not going to get there overnight, but commit to getting there eventually. And then when a problem comes up, like, oh my goodness, all the testing is squeezed into the last 2 days of the sprint, then we can talk about that as a team. And so when my teams have been faced with that, we came up with experiments like, okay, let's prioritize our stories for the sprint. And let's commit to getting one story ready for all the final testing by the end of the second day of the sprint. What has to happen? Well, what probably has to happen is maybe somebody's working on the story, but there's some database work that needs to be done. Well, somebody else that's working on a different story says, oh, I'll stop working on this story and I'll do that database task. So the team steps up and does whatever needs to be done to get a story finished, including the testing. And so we start learning how to prioritize and focus on finishing stories before we move on to the next one. You can't have the whole team working on one story, obviously, but there can be more than 1 or 2 people working on it at a time to help with the extra tasks and get that ready for the final exploratory testing or whatever needs to be done, test automation. And it's just so important to collaborate on it. So lots of different experiments that you could do, from even choosing the things like testing frameworks that you're going to use. Well, if we choose a testing framework that encourages collaboration between the testers and developers, that will automatically help us. There are a lot of different ways we can go about it, but it's up to the team because every context is different, and approach it as an experiment. Like, let's try this the next sprint and see if that moves us closer to the goal.
Yeah, sounds good. So thank you for those tips. Lisa, you have a really great career with a lot of experiences with different companies. And I would like to know, what is your thoughts about or around the evolution of the testing role, right? How has it, since you started and nowadays, how has it been evolving?
Oh, that's a great question, and I do feel like I have a unique perspective. I haven't seen it. I've been a tester now for 30 years. It's definitely. I mean, I've been lucky to always work in a collaborative way. Even so, for a long time, and maybe in a lot of organizations still happens, the testers are seen as the judge of when we're ready to release. So they're kind of seen as the owners of quality. In the late 90s, I worked for a web startup, and I was the manager of the quality team, test team, and my title was quality boss. And when I look at that, I cringe, but I literally was the decider. Okay, we're ready to go production, and then I did the release. And it's so wrong. It's the business that needs to decide, and we as testers and our whole delivery team can provide them with information of, here's what we did, here are the risks we identified, here are the risks we've been able to mitigate in different ways with either testing or instrumentation so that we can spot problems quickly in production. There's a lot of different ways to mitigate risk. And are you ready to turn it on? And of course, these days we also have the technology to use the release strategies like blue-green deploys, where you have an idle and an active production environment, and you can switch back and forth. So you can release the new stuff, and if it's not good, you switch back to the old one, or release feature flags. Or there are lots of ways we can hide things in production until we think we're ready, and even do testing in production. But I think that mindset of testers owning quality, that's something that's had to evolve. And the idea of testers doing all the testing, that was never right. And that's had to transition to, in Agile, everybody does testing. And I've seen myself in the last 10 years of working as a tester on an Agile team, my role, I certainly still did hands-on testing, and I did a lot of pairing and ensembling together with programmers and other people on the team. But I saw myself more as a test consultant. I was helping people on the team. Everybody needed to learn exploratory testing skills because otherwise we could never do all the exploratory testing. And I see a trend to fewer and fewer testers related to the number of developers on a team. I don't know if you've seen that too. And so there's no way, even if a tester tried, they couldn't keep up the work of 10 or 20 or 30 developers. And so helping everybody learn some testing skills and also proposing ideas when the team has a problem, like, gosh, we're having a problem where I think we know what to do with the story. We do the work, we deliver the story to the product owner, and the product owner says, well, that's not what I wanted. And so as a tester, gosh, maybe I actually was on a team with this problem, and I learned at a conference, I learned from Matt Wynn about example mapping. So I could bring that back to my team and say, hey, can you give me 30 minutes? I want to show you this new technique that I think might help us. And okay. And then it's like, hey, can we try this for our next pre-iteration planning meeting or pre-sprint planning meeting? And they were like, oh, okay. And so we can try things. And I use the term consultant as distinct from coaching, because a coach stands back and observes and asks good questions and tries to guide the team to solving their problems, which is really important. A consultant sees problems and points them out and suggests ways that we might deal with that problem. Let's try this experiment. And so I think the role of testers is definitely going that way. I think it's really important that we learn these tools we need data. We need to know what are our customers doing? What do our customers need? We need to use data from production to do that. So that's another area where we used to not really bother. Maybe we looked at support tickets, but we didn't look at things like performance in production or how many errors or analytics of how many customers, got through the funnel and signed up for our product. We really need to be involved in all those things now. And I think from an agile perspective, it's always been clear. It was a big mindset shift for me to join an agile team and realize it wasn't up to me of how something should work. It was up to our customers and our business people. And also the other big mindset shift is a lot of times in waterfall environments, testers are told, don't touch that, don't test it until it's all finished, because you'll be wasting time testing it more than once. Whereas in agile, we're working in small increments. We need to test early and often. And it's not a waste of time. We're shortening our cycles because we're finding the bugs quickly and giving that quick feedback. All those things can be really hard to shift toward. But I think that's where testers need to evolve. Alan Page and Brent Jensen over the past several years have come up with their modern testing principles. And Janet and I have found that these are fairly compatible with the agile tester principles that we came up with in our first book. But if you go to moderntesting.org, you can see those modern testing principles. And I'm pretty on board with those principles. I think they've summed it up in a good way. I don't think a lot of people are working that way yet, but I see the trend going towards that, and I think it's good.
Awesome. Thank you. This is great. Thank you for sharing. So Lisa, if you had to hire a QA or a tester tomorrow for your team, what qualities or skills would you look for in order to get the right person?
Oh yeah, one of my favorite topics. I hire for attitude and mindset. I don't really care if they can tick off a lot of skills on a list, because we can teach people the quote unquote technical skills they need. If they need to learn how to use robot framework, because that's what our team is using for our test framework, we can teach them to do that. We can teach people to code if they need to learn how to code. I started a programmer job not knowing a darn thing about coding, and I learned really quickly because the organization had a great education program, and I paired with people and it was collaborative. So what I like to do when I look for a tester is, well, one of the first questions I ask people is, what do you do for your professional growth, for your learning? And a lot of times they don't do anything. So that's not somebody I want on my team. Now, if it's because maybe they're a single parent and they're too busy, I could understand that. But when they just don't, it's like they haven't been reading blog posts, they haven't been looking at webinars, they haven't been reading books. Why not? There's so many great resources out there. Ministry of Testing, we've got all these other online organizations. And then when my teams have interviewed testers, we want to pair with them or work in an ensemble with them, and we have to prepare them for that, because that's scary if you never did it before. But just say, hey, sit down with me. I'm testing this UI right now. let's do some strong style pairing where we switch the driver and navigator role. And when you're the driver, I'll tell you what to do. And when you're the navigator, ask me questions. And you don't know anything about this application. So what do you want to know? What questions do you have? Can you think of anything to do to test this? And what I really want to see is, are they good at asking questions? Are they quick at picking things up? Are they comfortable collaborating, even if that's a new thing to them? And I want them to do that with other people on the team, developers, product owners, designers. Can they feel comfortable working with other people? We've got to have the good communication skills. We've got to be able to build relationships so that we can establish trust in our team, so that we can collaborate with people outside of our team. It's so important. And people are always talking about technical skills versus soft skills. I have a friend who calls soft skills harder skills, because learning to communicate and collaborate, that's trickier, and mindset and attitude. Technical skills can be trained more easily. You can train communication skills, of course, collaboration skills. You can thinking skills, critical thinking. Those are things people can learn. It's just not so cut and dried of how to do that. And so I just want people who are willing to just jump in and try anything, knowing that they'll get help that they need. I'll try to help with that. I'd like to learn that. And that's the attitude I love to see in a tester: curiosity, enthusiasm, enjoying. We're all introverts in this industry, I think, but we still enjoy working with each other, and that's what I'm looking to see.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing. So Lisa, what do you believe that are the most common misconceptions about the role of testing in agile development?
Well, there are a couple of different ones. There's one school of thought that everyone on an agile team is doing testing, especially if they're doing good practices like test-driven development and API testing and all those good test automation activities. And they don't say, well, we don't really even need any testers. I have seen that work when the domain that they're working in is something that's a product for other developers, or perhaps a product that's used by another system, and where the domain knowledge is something everybody on the team has already. You may not need a tester in that context. However, when you've got a product that's going out to the public, that's going to have security considerations, accessibility considerations, and where the business domain is really important, you've got to have somebody who can focus on that and focus on that big picture. How are our customers going to use our product, and be that resource for the team? The developers and other specialties, they're focused on their thing. If I'm writing production code, I'm kind of heads down working on this list. We work in these small stories, and I'm focused on that. There's got to be somebody who has the bandwidth to look at a bigger picture. And I think that's what I've forgotten your original question, because I kind of got off on a mental sidetrack. Were we talking about the role of testers? Oh, whether testers are needed. Yeah, the misconceptions. So I do think we need testers. And like I said earlier, unfortunately, people get reorganized into an agile environment and they get put on cross-functional teams. They don't understand that they all now need to take responsibility for testing and quality, and they still want to hand things off to the tester. And that's the common misconception. And even the testers, that's how they're used to working, so they don't question it. And they're not brought in. I've joined teams where they didn't want me in the iteration planning. Like, how are they going to make estimates for stories without knowing how long it's going to take to test them? Or even to have somebody who's going to ask good questions and make them realize, oh, that story's a lot bigger than we thought. So that's people. So many people don't understand testing, especially there are a lot of engineering managers out there who they never were testers. They don't really understand testing very well, and they just don't understand. It's not a phase. It's not a separate thing we do after we write code. It's part of software development, just like coding, just like design, just like architecture, just like operations. It's all part of software development. And so there's a misconception that, testers do some little thing that's in a phase. And I think it stems from, back 20, 30 years ago, and it probably still happens, but it was very common back then to see testers were people sitting in a cubicle, and they had manual regression test scripts, and they just went through those scripts all day, every day on their keyboard, which was, of course, an activity that could easily be automated. So it doesn't seem like a very valuable activity. Now people are starting to realize the value of things like exploratory testing and accessibility testing, and plus, a bunch of other things that testers bring to the party with our question asking skills and things like that, critical thinking skills. But it's just hard if people don't have that, haven't worked with those kind of testers. They don't understand the value, and they don't understand what they're missing if they don't have those specialists.
Totally. Thank you for sharing. So I think that probably you have faced some challenges not a lot of people with your experiences with taking a team or an environment from or a company from you join and everything is very manual, and then you have the mission or the challenge to automate a lot of stuff, right?
Mhm.
What can you share, like some tips, or what are the biggest challenges for companies trying to automate their testing in agile environments, right?
Yes, a lot of times even the developers don't understand, why do we need to automate the testing? And so it's very important that everybody feel the pain of manual regression testing. And so what I've done this on at least 4 teams. You have to definitely have management support to do this. Is first I go to the business stakeholders and say, what absolutely has to work in this application? What do we have to make sure we don't break? And they give me a list. And then I go back and write manual regression testing scripts for each of those things, because we're going to have to do that. We don't have any automation. And then maybe the next to the last day of the iteration or sprint, I go to the team and say, okay, it's time to do the manual regression testing for this next release. And I hand out scripts to everybody. This is your part. This is your part. The developers, the DBA, the product owner, the scrum master, everybody gets to do the soul crushing work of manual regression checking, as some people call it. That's this really good motivation for suddenly the developers have great ideas on how to make the code more testable. And maybe we need to come up with a test automation strategy. Maybe it would be good to use a visual model like the test automation pyramid to think about how we want to approach this. Again, it's not going to be something we solve overnight. What's our strategy? The strategy I've seen work the best is developers adopting tester development. That's not a quick fix. It takes a long time to learn that. It's a big investment. But I'm told that teams that, and that's been my experience, teams that practice tester development well, they avoid 80% of the bugs that most software run in. They prevent 80% of those bugs. So that's a really worthwhile investment. But it takes a long time to learn. So meanwhile, we've got to automate some tests. And so I've had good fortune by using a good UI level test framework to automate some smoke tests through the user interface if we've got a user interface, and also get a good tool. We have great tools now to test at the API level, do functional testing at the API level, and get some smoke tests going. And so then we don't have to do those manual checklists anymore. And we can start focusing on first automating unit level and then more thorough testing as it's appropriate at the API and UI levels. But you have to start by everybody really wanting to change and do the automation, because it's not going to be easy. It's an investment we have to make.
Okay, yeah. Do you have some ideas, or what would be your thoughts around metrics? Do you think that do you like them? What metrics do you consider should be established in companies? What do you think about metrics?
Well, I think it's very important to have data. Right? It's very important to have metrics. But what is it that we need to measure? And so, like I mentioned earlier, as a team, we need to decide on what quality means to us and come up with how we're going to measure that, because again, it's going to be different for each team. And as we're doing experiments to try to improve our process and improve our quality, each little experiment needs to have some way to measure. So let's say, we're going to try example mapping in our pre-iteration planning meetings. So we believe that if we use example mapping in our iteration pre-planning meeting, that we will get better shared understanding about what to do for each story. And that will result in 50% fewer stories being rejected by the product owner within the next 2 weeks or the next 4 weeks. Or it may be our cycle time will be 20% shorter. Whatever it is, coming up with metrics like that as we're working on these little step-by-step goals, that's really, really important. Metrics are so dangerous because they can be used in such bad ways. We've all heard, and I've met these teams where the testers were, their performance was evaluated on how many bugs they found, and the developers were evaluated on how many bugs were in their code, and that did not make for good collaboration between testers testers and developers. So there's a lot of really bad metrics. I think a lot of companies now coming up with service level objectives for their overall application, which is important because that's how the customer sees our product. They don't see the little bits and pieces, they see the whole thing. So there might be availability metrics, there might be performance, what's the page load time meant to be, and so those are overarching organization metrics that we need to pay attention to. I've gone into work at companies where I asked, do we have any service level objectives or service level indicators? And they're like, I don't know. And it turned out there were some. They weren't even communicated to the teams. That's silly. The other kind of general metrics that we know from scientifically gathered data apply to a large majority of software organizations are the DORA metrics. So the Google State of DevOps survey that's done every year, it's on right now if people want to go fill it out. That has gathered data from teams that helps us know what practices help teams perform well and how do we measure that performance. And so there's the 5 key metrics I think now from DORA that I probably can't name them off the top of my head, but cycle time, change failure rate, the amount of time it takes between releases, those kind of metrics. Look them up because I can't say them off the top of my head, which is bad because I'm a DORA guide. I should know those. I would encourage testers to join. I recently joined the DORA community, and it's been really helpful to me because it's quite related to testing and quality of how do we measure it. And I've been in some really helpful presentations and discussions about good ways to measure. And the website is just dora.community. But I think it's really, really helpful because these are metrics. They're not magic, but years and years of data from the State of DevOps survey, which thousands and thousands of companies participate in, have shown these metrics are helpful. Time to respond to failures, things like that. These are metrics that are helpful to most organizations. And so we can see if those would be helpful for us. It's a place to start. And there are metrics that are easy to gather the data. In fact, there's even an open source project that you can just install the code and it'll do those measurements for you. So, but I think it's really important for teams to set the metrics based on their goals. Where are they trying to get to? How will they know they're getting there? How do they measure their progress?
Nice. You're the first person that knows about this DORA framework. I had to learn it a little because one customer wanted it. So we partnered with Google and we tried to put it over there. But that's great that you support these. I also agree that it's really good, right? So related to DevOps, you mentioned it, and I think that it's very important, right? DevOps, at least in Latin America, I have seen many companies doing Scrum with their sales and with their teams, but they leave outside a DevOps specialized team or something and work like a shared services or something. Do you see this trend, or do you think this works, or should DevOps team be integrated in each cell, or how do you see DevOps and Scrum teams working or collaborating?
I think it's been interesting because when the term DevOps came about in 2009, I think Patrick Dubois coined that term and hosted the first DevOps days. I thought it was weird because I had always been working at small startups and we did our own operations. There was no separation there. But later I realized that in bigger organizations, they might have done an agile transformation, but they didn't do anything with the operations people. So they were still, and this happens today, they're still throwing the code over the wall to operations. And so the idea with DevOps is, like I said, we build it, we run it. And that means we need those operations specialists. The other kind of motivator for it was since 2000 and starting in late 2009 or 2009, 2010, infrastructure as code became more and more important. So we don't have people going out and typing on the command line. They're using tools and writing scripts for the deployment pipelines and for the operations. And they need to write good code. They need good development skills. And so the feature teams need the operation skills to understand how to instrument their code, how to monitor it in production, how to build in observability, and the operations teams need to learn how to write good code. And the way I've been lucky, the last full-time job I had, I was really lucky to work in an organization that had really built a good DevOps culture. So we did have a couple of platform teams that kind of made, they built the infrastructure. And for each feature team, there was an embedded site reliability engineer from the platform team to help that team learn how to implement and maintain that infrastructure that the platform team had built. So the platform team is not going to maintain it for those feature teams. It's just they're providing it. And then the feature team needs to integrate it into what they're doing and take care of production themselves and respond to the production problems themselves. And conversely, the platform teams took developers from the feature teams and embedded them in the platform teams to help them write better code. And these weren't permanent, they rotated around, but it just established such a good culture. And so my team needed that we were switching our deployment pipeline from GitHub Actions to Harness. And I knew that the platform team had been working on implementing, creating a Harness infrastructure. And so I was able to go to the platform people and say, well, we need a testing strategy. What are the risks that we need to look out for? And they explained what those were. And we created a testing strategy. I created a testing strategy together with one of the developers on the feature team and our site reliability engineer. And then step by step, we went through our implementation plan and we did testing along the way together. And it was so reassuring because when they first said, Lisa, we need a testing strategy to move to this new infrastructure, I was like, what? But I found out it's just like any testing strategy, but you need those people with the expertise to help educate you. And that was just such a great way of working that the features team, we took the production problems ourselves, but we had the SREs backing us up, helping us create better dashboards to monitor the product or helping us have better telemetry. And conversely, our developers were helping them write better code for infrastructure as code. So that's the best example I've seen, and I think that's what most people should get to. You can have something you call a DevOps team, but those people should be working hand in hand with the feature teams, not doing things in a silo. We don't want the silos.
Yeah, totally agree. Okay, so regarding the topic of documentation, Agile kind of, I don't want to say the word would be devalues maybe the importance of documentation. What do you think about documentation, about what's going on in the future? What's the vision of documentation and testing?
It's interesting, because I think it's because the Agile Manifesto says working software over documentation. They don't mean don't have documentation. And, you asked earlier about automation and how can you get a team started with automation? Sometimes teams get pushback from maybe the product people or the managers to say, well, don't spend time automation. Don't spend time automating. We just need to get these features out. But what's the best documentation? Automated regression tests. They always have to pass, they're always correct, and they describe the behavior of the system. And they're really good, we have really good test frameworks now that make human readable tests. So anybody can go look at these tests and understand what they're testing, and then they understand how the system's working. So what you can say to your manager or product person or somebody's pushing back against having time to learn how to automate your tests is, do you want some good living documentation of the system? Everybody understands this. Of course, everybody wants good documentation because there are always gonna be new people coming on board that have to know it and learn it. And so I have found that that's the most effective way for internal documentation. And of course, depending on your product, you may need documentation for your end users. I am a fan in that scenario, and sometimes even for internal documentation, I'm a fan of having technical writers because that's their specialty and they do a much better job of organizing the information. I've been on teams where we used a wiki, and I love wikis, but we start putting information on the wiki, it's really easy to make a mess and you can't find anything anymore. And so having somebody whose expertise is organizing knowledge is really, really important. That's another area of documentation. When I first learned to be a programmer and I was learning from manuals and videos and stuff, I was like, these manuals are terrible. When I grow up, I'm going to write better manuals and better education materials. And that's really been one of the things I've worked on a lot. And I love creating a new knowledge base for customers because there are good ways to do that. And we have, again, the tools and infrastructure we have available to us to build those kind of things is great. But it is an investment, but it's really important. I worked on the Pivotal Tracker team. We were an online tracking tool, and we redid our knowledge base. Our help page originally was like this page with frequently asked questions, and I think there were like 280 questions. And you just had to use the browser search to try to find what you wanted to know. And we turned that into a real knowledge base where people could search, and it was well organized. They could find what they want. It cut our customer support emails down. I don't even remember the percentage, but the bulk of our customer support emails went away because people could just find the information they wanted. So knowledge is good, and good ways to share that knowledge is good. So there are a lot of different purposes of documentation. And, like I say, to understand how our software system works, I like to have automated tests well done for that living documentation. And then for things like end user documentation, things we had to put a lot of thought in. And we can automate. That same team, we had a public API that people could use. And our API documentation was automatically generated. And all the examples that we, for each endpoint, we had examples. Those were all from the unit tests for the API. So those tests were running every day, and anytime a test was updated, it would update in the documentation. So the examples always worked. They never got out of date. So we have these wonderful tools at our disposal. We just have to use them.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for sharing and for those tips. Lisa, regarding risk management, in traditional projects, waterfall projects, there was a person in charge of doing risk management, right? The project manager normally. Now it looks like it has a lot to do with the developers and the QAs per se, right? Within their Scrum practices or their Agile practices. How have you seen this risk management evolve across the years?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the old-fashioned risk assessment that I used even early in my career of what the impact of this thing happening and what's the probability that it will happen and evaluating those together, that's a tried and true method that still works. So we just have to sit down and brainstorm all the things that could happen and think of the impact versus the probability. If it's a high impact and it causes our customers a lot of pain and costs them a lot of money, we have to mitigate that risk, even if it's a low probability. And if it's a high probability but low impact, well, maybe we don't want to annoy our customers with, death by paper cut. So we might want to fix that. So that's a great way to do it. And at the same time, there are lots of other ways. I just think it's really important to use something visual. So we can use a mind map and brainstorm about the risks. I really love risk storming. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where this is Baron von Dalen and I can't remember who else. Anyway, they came up with this deck of cards that has different quality attributes, like looking at all the potential quality attributes like security, performance, availability, installability. So look at all these different quality attributes to decide what's most important for the feature that we're going to work on. Because like I say, we can't fix everything. We have to focus. And then brainstorm about the risk for those, like pick 6 quality attributes. Brainstorm about what risks we might run into. And then the card deck has practices that would help you mitigate the risks. And of course, you're not limited to the card deck, but just to help you think. It's really important to think outside the box when you talk about risks, because we all have our, unconscious bias. We may not be able to see the risks if we don't really try to expand our thinking, think laterally. So using a framework like risk storming can really, really help. And you can do that at riskstormingonline.com, and you can do it online too. But I also like Ellen Gottesdiener and Mary Gorman's book, Discover to Deliver, which is about business analysis, agile business analysis. They have the 7 product dimensions, and that's kind of a cheat sheet I use a lot when I go into a planning meeting to talk about a new feature, because it covers things like, who are the users, where are they going to be, how are they going to be accessing our product. Maybe they're going to do it on a mobile device. Maybe it's a device on a solar panel out in the desert. What are the security concerns? It's just, I like to look at something that spells those things out, all these different dimensions of quality that might be important. And so then I can start asking questions about it and find out what's most important. And like I say, we want to brainstorm and think of everything, but then we have to focus on what's most important. Joao Proença did a great keynote a couple years ago at Agile Testing Days, where he talked about cognitive bias. And there's something called the paradox of choice. And as humans, we love choice. Like we love turning our TVs on and going through, 8 million shows on Netflix or Prime or, Disney Channel or whatever. But when you flip through channels or flip through shows, sometimes it's hard to decide because there's so much choice. And that's a proven thing. If we have more than about 6 choices, we cannot make decisions. We get paralyzed. And so that's why it's really important to think about all your risks and then go back and say, what are the most important ones? We have to focus. We can't test everything. We have to focus our risk mitigation here. It may be through testing. It may be through other things like observability of being able to respond to problems quickly. Sometimes our test environments don't look like production. And so we know we're not going to be able to simulate what customers are doing. So we have to have other ways to mitigate. But it's important to think about all those things. So just using some process of expanding and then narrowing it down again and prioritizing, I think is really important. And it's something the whole team needs to be involved in. It's been interesting. Like the last team I got, it's like we're going to talk about a new feature, and I was like, let's try mind mapping because they hadn't done mind mapping before. And they're like, oh, but that's such a simple feature. Well, that's okay. Let's just try mind mapping on, all the things about the feature and what could go wrong with it. And yeah, we have this huge mind map. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah, okay. Thank you for sharing. So Lisa, there are many persons, hopefully, looking at this video and that they have just started their QA or testing journey, right? So if you had a time machine and you could jump back in the days where you were starting your journey, what advice would you give to yourself?
Well, unfortunately, I think I did this somewhat even earlier in my career, but I know now that it's really, really important and I have to work a lot harder on it. And that is building relationships. So in the last several years, I learned that when I start a new job, I need to make connections, to make friends. I need to meet people. And so I have to overcome my shyness and ask, like I say, I'm very interested in operations, monitoring, observability. So I want to get to people on those teams, if they're separate teams, and say, hey, can we meet for 30 minutes? I'd like to get to know you. And then, can we do this every couple weeks? And so we can stay in touch, and so then I have somebody that I can call on, like, oh, I have something I need to do this in your wheelhouse. Can you collaborate with me and show me how to do it or get me started? And building relationships is just so important because we need to have that trust within our teams, and we need to be able to get help from people on other parts of the organization. And I think what really spurred me into that is Katrina Clokey's book, Practical Guide to Testing and DevOps, which has been around for several years now. It's available on LeanPub. And she devotes a lot of that book on building relationships, building bridges. What are ways that you can do that? And that really I'd always really gone out of my way to try to collaborate with people, even on the business side. And I was privileged to do that because there are a lot of organizations where they say, nope, you can't talk to anybody outside your team. I have not experienced that, but I know some people do. But I had the freedom to approach people and say, hey, can I meet with you? Can I have a cup of coffee with you, or a virtual coffee with you, whatever it is. And but that I'd always done that somewhat. But that book really, especially because I really wanted to learn more about the DevOps and the site reliability engineering and that side of things, and it made me realize, well, I've got to get to know these people and learn how to work with them and ask them to help me learn the things I want to learn. And it worked really well. And it's just such a great resource to know the people that can help you, and you've already got a relationship with them, so you know that they're willing to help you. And so that's definitely what I would go back and tell myself, like, yes, Lisa, do this more.
Yeah, and right, and these days it's very underrated, right? Because of the pandemic, everyone is staying in their houses, so it's more difficult than ever to get back building relationships, right? I totally agree with you. I actually there's this quick story that I can tell you about this that I like to tell. So when you build a relationship, there's this magic happening, right? And the thing is that if you get feedback, for example, from a person that you don't know anything about, if they tell you, "Hey, Lisa, your shirt, the color, I don't think it's great," you will take it in a certain way, right? But if it's your brother or your sister that tells you that, you know that they are trying to help you, right? So if you build this relationship, then you're able to take feedback in a whole with a very different bias, right? So it helps a lot. So I totally agree. It's a very important skill that we are kind of missing nowadays.
That's a great, I'm really glad you brought up feedback. That's a really great angle. I hadn't really thought of that, but that is really important.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing. So, Lisa, I have a couple of questions more, and then I will let you go if that's okay. If you could have a dinner conversation with an influential, either QA or agile figure or whoever you could, who would be and what would you ask, or how would that go?
Oh gosh, I've been so lucky to actually have had dinner with a lot of my heroes.
Nice. That's really nice.
Yeah, it is really nice. Golly, that's a good question. Because people like Linda Rising. I was lucky to meet her earlier in my career, and I learned so much from her. Because I've gone to a lot of conferences, so I've gotten a lot of early in my extreme programming career, it was such a welcoming community, and it was a small community, so I got to meet people like Kent Beck, Ward Cunningham, Rachel Davies, Jutta Eckstein. Just all these people who were leading the way back then. So I've been really lucky with that. I guess I'd like to, although I met him because I took the problem solving leadership course, I might like to have gotten to know Jerry Weinberg better. I did go to that course with Esther Derby and Johanna Rothman, who are friends of mine who are also teaching it. But I didn't really get to know Jerry, and I've heard so many wonderful things about him. I would definitely like to be able to go back and get to know him better and hear his experiences, because he certainly paved the path for so many of us in terms of the importance of quality and good ways to solve problems and to help people solve problems. His leadership, all the books he's written. So definitely he would be one.
Nice. Thank you for sharing. So Lisa, any question that I forgot to ask you or that you would have liked me to ask you? Any message or any question?
Well, you didn't ask me about my donkeys.
Well, what's up with your donkeys?
I was just people know I love to talk about my donkeys, and I often I've got a donkey on my shirt today.
So you have some real donkeys over there?
Yeah, I do. I have 3 miniature donkeys and a standard. And,
wow.
And I always say I've learned a lot about agile from my donkeys, because donkeys work on trust. So, I had horses all my life before I had donkeys. And, you can train a horse by positive reinforcement, bribing them, maybe even bullying them a little bit in terms of, well, if you don't do this, it's not going to be very comfortable for you, and they'll go along with it. Donkeys will only do things for you if they trust you and they know that you are putting them first. You have their safety in mind. You love them. And that was a big, it's kind of like the mindset shift from waterfall to agile, or training horses to training donkeys. Because donkeys really have to know that you love them and you won't let any harm come to them. And once they know that, they'll do absolutely anything for you, but you have to keep that trust. And I think we humans are that way too. When we trust each other as a team, and I've been on teams with a high trust, high psychological safety, then we can give feedback, as you were saying, and people will take it in a good way. We can argue maybe about how we're going to implement something, but we know it's not personal. We're just bringing up or point out problems. If I say there's something wrong with your code, I'm saying your baby is ugly, but I'm not saying it in a negative way. I'm saying it in a let's work on this together type of way. And so I think that's a lesson I've carried from my donkeys and reinforced good ways to work on teams and help build that safe environment, that trusting environment.
Nice. It's the most important thing, right? Google has made a lot of studies, and even if they have tried to put not the most important, but the most smart persons in the same team, they didn't get the results that they were expecting from that team, right? So the secret is what you mentioned, right? Putting everyone in a safe environment.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you throw a lot of seeds in the garden, if you put the right sun, the right water, and you take care of the environment rather
Mm-hmm.
than taking care of each seed, that'll make them all succeed, right? So yeah, I totally agree with you. Lisa, thanks a lot for joining this conversation. It was awesome. I really enjoyed, and I'm sure that the audience will really like it. I will let a leap over there in the description and in the comments all the links that we discussed. And if we want to follow up with Lisa with more of your work, we will put it over there. Which do you have a social network preferred where they can get in touch with you or something?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Mastodon as at Lisa Crispin, and I'm on LinkedIn. If you just look for Lisa Crispin, you'll find me on LinkedIn as well. And I try to stay active on all of those. And you can come to my website, lisacrispin.com, and contact me that way, or book a chat with me from there. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find, and I love to talk about testing. So feel free to get in touch.
You are very nice. Thank you for this conversation and for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's
And
my pleasure. It was an honor to be a guest on your podcast. So thank you.
nah, come on, it's an honor for me. Thank you for being like that. So hopefully we can have another session at someday, right? So thank you for being here, and talk to you soon.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye.